Today, Pierre Poilievre got to meet Joe Biden. And Pierre introduced himself, put his hand out, and said, Mr. Biden, I am Pierre Poilievre, and I am the leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. And Biden kind of chuckled and raised an eyebrow and said, loyal opposition? And Pierre said, yes, sir. In Canada, we believe that opposition is an act of loyalty. I'm paraphrasing. And Biden said, well, we do too, unfortunately. Which, given the political climate in the States right now, I guess, we can forgive that little moment of honesty. But, Pierre was right. And it's actually the perfect segue into today's class. And of all the classes I teach you today, I feel like this is the one that will impact you the most. It is the most important. And the way I got your mindset ready for life as a public figure, this class is talking about partisanship, governing for everyone, and why party lines matter. How party lines are an actual function of democracy. The same way the loyal opposition is an integral force for democracy. So we're going to unpack all of that today. And I'll tell you what this is going to do for you. It's going to take the us and them away from your role as a politician. Yeah, okay, I get the horse and pony show we do for the public, right? Where we pretend to all hate each other. And even if the opposition cures cancer, we're never going to, celebrate them for it. We'll find a reason to complain because that's what you do with party politics where it comes to the public-facing stuff. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of collaborating in between parties. And you have to in order to get things done. And you have to get good legislation passed. And at the end of the day, besides the public fights, everybody wants to have a good tenure. And they want something to show for it. And that requires cooperation and negotiation with both sides. So at some point, the partisanship has to sit on the shelf for a while until the cameras get turned on again. But, behind the scenes, everybody is actually quite collaborative, and you have to be. So the thing that always made me sad as a comms person is that, families will often split up over politics. You hate a leader so much and you won't have anything to do with them. I've seen parents run for office getting disowned by their kids because they chose to run under a party flag the kids don't agree with. I've seen all sorts of stuff. Families divided, husband and wives split up because they disagree politically. And on one level, I kind of get it because how you lean politically says a lot about you as a person, and not in terms of integrity or intelligence or things like that, but what your priorities are. And if you are, a socialist and you prioritize that over economic well-being, let's say, or liberty and freedoms, then, you're constantly going to butt heads. And often you will disparage, even in your own mind, the person who doesn't prioritize the way you do. And it's not enough to just say, well, this person disagrees. You malign them personally. To say, well, they must be dumb, or they must be mean, or they must be evil because they don't have the same priority in the same order that I do. And this is what we see happen with hyperpartisanship, where, like I said, there's all these family and social divisions. And the part that makes me sad is that, like I said, there's collaboration behind the scenes. So I remember when I lived in Ontario, I had a girlfriend that was a comm strategist for the NDP. And I'm someone who's a very proud conservative. So she and I would work on opposing camps. We would razz each other online constantly, and then we'd go for drinks. Our friendship may remain whole. We even did a podcast on it about how we're on opposing sides politically, but how we can still maintain a good working relationship and a friendship. So because at the end of the day, we both want good things for Canada. We just disagree on what those things are. But we understand that innately our intentions are good. What we have in common is that we love Canada. How we show that love or how we want it, distributed, let's say, or whatever, is different. Our ideologies are different, but our passion is the same. Our loyalty is the same. It's just a different ideology. So what we do is when we are together, we have a respect for each other, that we both want good things for the country, and we are both servants of democracy. And that's enough. That's enough to hold a steadfast friendship. So the ideology, at some point, you got to put that aside and stick to what counts. So you know what happens when you get like that? So often, and especially with scarcity mindset people, I'm going to keep going back to the foundational roots of this course because they really do matter. There's a reason I started with that. So when you meet someone from the opposing party and you are of a scarcity mindset, which means you are afraid of competition, right? That's part of scarcity. So you're afraid of competition. You've got your back up as soon as they walk in the room. But the worst part of that is that your day just got ruined because you can't handle your own emotional immaturity. Your day gets ruined when you have to deal with people from a different party. And because, unless you've taken my course where I told you to learn their language so you can speak from their place, so you can speak from understanding where they're coming from, as part of your communication skills that we learned in past classes, right? So when you apply that in these situations, you can see someone from the opposing side and give them, a high five. I remember I was very active in several campaigns in the Niagara region in Ontario, and we were dealing with somebody in town that was doing some activism around the protection of children. And this person was apolitical. Their issue was a social issue. They weren't really political people, but they were looking for support. And I was someone who was very inspired by their cause. So I decided, to give them some professional services for free as my way of giving them some moral support. And he really wanted to speak to the NDP because Jagmeet Singh had talked about his own abuse as a child, and he really wanted to raise attention to what he was doing with the party that he felt the most aligned with. Happened to be NDP. I'm not an NDP, but I really believed in the guy's cause. And I knew that the MPP, Jeff Birch, in that area, is an integral guy and that he would care. So I could have been partisan and said, hey, you know what? I don't want to deal with him. He's NDP. I'm not about to hand him a photo op. You know what I mean? Why would I do that? But at the end of the day, what's more important? Raising awareness about the abuse of children? Or, how am I going to not raise awareness for the abuse of children so I can deprive one politician of a photo op? Like, that would be shitty of me if I did that. So, you know what? I called Birch's office. I helped make an appointment for this guy. And I got him a couple of meetings with him. And, Jeff Birch was wonderful. He agreed to come and give a speech at a rally the guy was hosting. And he showed up and gave a beautiful speech. And, not once. It's funny, when I walked into Jeff Birch's office, him knowing I'm a very active, busy conservative, we kind of chuckled when we first looked at each other because, hi enemy, hey enemy, but we had a common good. And in the times that we were together through that process, there was only ever love there. There was only, we both felt inspired by the same cause. And in that moment, all that mattered was children. We didn't care that he was NDP and I was conservative. Everybody got a photo op, you know what I mean? And it was funny because I have pictures with Jeff Birch in that moment. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I would love to see more of that in politics. One of the things that happened with Trudeau is Trudeau brought American campaigning to Canada and did the divisive thing, right? When he started calling Canadians racist and pitting one against the other. And, so he was really good at dividing the country and getting dividing families by bringing in this ideology that demonizes anybody that doesn't think like him. And that made the entire country toxic. The last 4 or 5 years has just been one angry, hot mess. And that's because instead of soothing hyperpartisanship, he threw gasoline on the fire. And that kind of hyperpartisanship is not only toxic, but it keeps things from getting done for the country. So I want you to keep in mind as you're moving forward, there's the horse and pony show, but then there's the behind the scenes where shit has to get done. And if you have to govern with these people that you supposedly hate publicly, life's going to be pretty toxic. Can you imagine going to a job every single day where 2/3 of the people there you can't stand? Maybe that is the way your life is at work. Imagine how awful that would be, or how awful it is if you're experiencing that right now. Now imagine trying to run a country with people you hate. Nothing gets done. Nothing gets done. And hyperpartisanship is one of the biggest problems in Canada. Like, I've mentioned this before, where one party could have the cure for cancer and the other party would find a reason to complain about it. And as a result, people die. Right? We never give each other the win. It's so rare that we see, like, for example, the NDP Liberal coalition was unheard of. Some people called it treasonous. Like, that was just things that happened behind the scenes where, you whip each other in a certain side. It was never done so openly, blatantly, and carte blanchely, right? Never. So that's why it was such a huge deal when it happened. And I agree that it ended up stalling a lot of things in Parliament and it was counterproductive. But what I appreciated about it was the closest thing we've seen to collaboration between parties. And, although that this was used in an obstructionist way, so the coalition with the NDP and Liberals was very obstructionist for the country. Having said that, if the collaboration could be proactive, imagine what could be done. Imagine if people linked arms and said, this week the Conservatives and the Liberals are going to link arms to end spousal abuse or child abuse or poverty or whatever. And that kind of happened with COVID. That sort of happened with COVID. When CERB first started, I know we had a lot of problems with CERB later, but when COVID first started and these massive lockdowns were going to happen and everybody's businesses were going to freeze, like, that was some scary shit, right? And they started to mention some kind of a CERB. We didn't even have a name for it yet, but the Liberals were saying that they were going to have some kind of support in place to help Canadians weather the storm. And I was kind of cringing, worried that the Conservatives were going to fight it for the sake of fighting it, and they didn't. Instead, they pleaded with him to do more. There were a lot of business people, for example, that were falling through the cracks of the programs, and it was the Conservatives that brought that forward and said, hey, you missed a spot. Let's support them too. So COVID was the first time we saw the parties work together, especially in the beginning and the crisis points. That partisanship kind of went to the side for a minute. And although, of course, there was that loyal opposition, which we're going to talk about in a second, that he still filled that function, he was also very collaborative, right? And all the parties kind of got together and there were certain things we didn't fight each other on, right? So when it came to vaccines, all the parties were kind of on the same side, except for the PPC. They're always offside, but everybody else is kind of on side. So, where it mattered, people came together. So in that moment, democracy really showed us what it could do for a country. Because although, yes, we lost businesses and yes, a lot of people suffered, but compared to what other countries went through, we fared pretty well and we're rebounding very quickly. So partisanship, serves a purpose, but then sometimes it can get in the way. But when you're able to put it aside, things really get done. And at the end of the day, you have to remember, and all politicians should remember, that you're not just governing for the people who voted for you. You have to govern for everybody, which means you have to govern even for the people that not only voted against you, but worked actively to help you lose the election, and you just got lucky that you won. So when you win, you almost have to forget everything that happened up until that second, because your loyalty and your determination and all your fight has to be not just for the people who campaigned for you, but for everyone. And you have to govern for everyone. And one thing that hyperpartisanship does is it makes you forget anybody who's not in your base. Because that's the thing, we say, shore up the base. You're going to hear that all the time. And I agree. Listen, I'm not saying to ignore your base. You need your base to win. So you got to make sure that, they're happy. You're using language they understand, that they can relate to. and you have to keep loyal, to what they expect from you. Having said that, though, you have to remember that when you're actually in office, you need to take care of everybody, which means you need to understand what everybody feels and thinks. You need to understand the communities that you've never really been interested in before, because maybe your voter base doesn't make up parts of that community, right? But as an elected official, you need to be able to represent everybody, which means if you have a constituent that's traditionally NDP, let's say, and you're a conservative or a liberal and they need help, you have to put that on the shelf and do your job as an MP and make sure they get the help they need. And if you do a good job, hey, you might just win them over to your side, right? So partisanship has its place, but it also can be a problem. And like I said, there's a lot of conflict in the advice I give you, right? On the one hand, because life in politics is a dichotomy. So yes, partisanship is important, but also remember you're governing for everybody. Yes, having a clear ideal, right, is important. Partisanship works in that case. But again, you don't want it to interfere with things getting done when you take it so far that you can't be collaborative and for the sake of your constituents and be willing to work together with someone who's not from your party. Now, let's talk about parties and party lines and why they matter. Party lines are an act of democracy. You're going to hate me for what I'm about to say. This is going to be the hardest thing for me to help you unlearn, because we've been taught to hate the term toe the party line. And every time we see a politician do that, we get angry, right? And when they refuse to give their own personal opinion and instead they respond with the party line, we get angry. We say that it's not integral, and the press will pounce all over it. But I will tell you that the politician that is towing the party line is doing it in reverence not to their party, but to democracy. A politician that toes the party line is not a slave to a party, is not doing something that is not integral, is not just obeying and being weak. It's the hardest thing you will ever do as a politician. It requires a level of emotional maturity and understanding that most people, especially the public, will never understand. You will be maligned for it, which makes it even harder, but it is an important function of democracy. When you are towing the party line, you are not doing a favor to your party leader. You are acting in an integral way as a function of democracy. So what do you mean? How is lying about your personal opinion, how is not speaking your truth, since we're in the I have to share my truth generation now, right? How is that, not integral? It sounds like it's going to be a big conflict in your head, but it really isn't. Think about it this way. As a voter, I want you to look at this from the voter's perspective. To get to know every single candidate and what they believe on every single thing, because, parties are a big tent. So you get your centrist version of party people, plus you get the far extreme version of that party people, right? So whether you're extreme left or extreme right, or whether you're somewhere in the middle, even within one party, there's a lot of diversity of thought and opinion. So what happens with a party platform is they kind of disseminate all those diverse conflicting opinions within their own tent, and they bring it down to one platform. This is what they agree as a party that they're going to run with. And as a matter of fact, most parties, what they do is their platform is decided on votes. So their party membership will go to a convention. They will put all the major issues that are going on in the country on the platform. Each EDA, remember I mentioned the EDA in the last couple of classes, will send a delegation. So there's one huge convention, delegations from all 308 ridings, and this happens provincially too. And they will vote as a group as to what's more important. And then party leadership will take those results and use that to craft what the party platform is going to be. That's democracy. So that is, these organizations that represent their riding and the people in their riding, and this is what their riding is saying that they want on these certain topics, and they're bringing that It's with all other ridings. And just like democracy, the majority wins. And how the collective votes is how the party shapes that platform. So now, knowing that the majority of voters put 80% of the weight on the party, not the candidate, and that I could run my dog and my dog might still win because that's how much voters care more about the party than the candidate, what you think on one specific issue suddenly is pretty irrelevant, is it? So as a Canadian, I can't be expected to learn what each individual politician thinks about each individual thing, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what the winning party is going to do. And what they're going to do is follow what they say is going to happen in the platform, hopefully. Right? So you owe it to your voter to be very clear that if they vote conservative, they're going to get a conservative representing them. That if the Conservative Party said, this is our stance on this issue, even if you don't agree, if your voters vote conservative because they agree with that issue, your job serving democracy is to represent them the way they ask you to, not impose your own opinion. Therefore, sharing your opinion is irrelevant. And it's confusing. It muddies the water. So that's what this guy is saying, but the party's saying something different. Did the party change its mind? You see, you confuse the conversation. And this is what happens when candidates think they're important. They're not. They're in the big sea of the political system of Canada. You're a drop of water. In 308 ridings, your opinion is irrelevant. You're a drop of water. If you have a symphony and one singer decides to sing a different key, or the drummer decides to use a different pace, or whoever is playing in a different whatever, you're going to screw up the whole thing. And instead of the audience hearing the big, beautiful, sonata, all they're going to hear is the clanging of your off-key voice. And that one voice out of key, that one drummer out of pace, will screw up the entire orchestra. That's politics. So when you have 307 ridings all saying the same thing, and one candidate from one riding talking a bunch of shit, you have a problem. Don't ever be that guy. Your promise to your voters is to follow the party platform, is to serve democracy, not to serve the ego of your own opinion. Your own opinion is irrelevant. You know who matters? The opinions of your voters. The opinions of the masses. And how about the opinion of party leadership who has access to information, technology, polling on a federal level that you don't understand? So because all the people in your hockey club think a certain way, or because, a certain voting cohort, union people or gun people or whatever feel a certain way, doesn't mean all of Canadians feel a certain way. I remember somebody saying to me, you guys are making a mistake with the gun things because there's 3 million gun voters in Canada. 3 million gun voters you don't want to piss off. And I love the gun people, by the way. I'm a big supporter. But my answer to them was, yeah, but there's 35 million Canadians. So what's your 3 million people going to do in the face of 35 million that don't necessarily agree with you? So you may think whatever cohort you're listening to is what everybody thinks. This is something I hear my mom do all the time because she follows, a certain ideology, which means she listens only to that news's ideology. So, she'll listen to right-leaning news and right-leaning commentary and right-leaning everything and then say, everybody feels this. No, mama. All right-leaning people feel this, but there's another whole half of the population that doesn't feel that way. You're just not hearing them because algorithms work to keep us in bubbles to only show you the stuff you want to hear. So you're only ever hearing one side of an argument, usually. So you owe it to stick to the party line. You owe it. You owe it to the party who's putting a shit ton of money and energy into you and giving you a lot of support. And you owe it to your voters that say, if I'm going to give you my vote, remember, candidate, I'm not voting for you. I'm voting for the color of your sign. So you've got to give me what the party is promising, even if you don't like it. I'm not voting for you to like something. I'm voting for you because you promised to represent this platform. And as soon as you deviate from that conversation, because my personal integrity, as soon as you have to do that, you confuse people. Don't confuse people. If you're a liberal, be a liberal. If you're NDP, be an NDP. If you're a conservative, be a conservative. And you're not going to agree with every single thing. And this is the thing that pisses me off about voters, especially conservative voters. They're the worst for this. You can agree with 99% of the platform. Then they do one thing that's out of step. I'm not voting for them. No, I'm going to go vote for Bernier. The one little thing. You could agree with everything else. There's one thing that's out of step and you're out. I find on the left, they're actually, they apologize for their leaders. So it doesn't matter what sins the leader commits. Everybody puts their blinders on. What? Foreign interference? Buying elections? What? I didn't see nothing. You know what I mean? Oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Who cares? Sponsorship scandal? Oh, well, it's not a big deal. Big deal. Right? So liberals are great for this. They will say, well, overarching, I agree with the message, and therefore I'm going to stand behind, I don't agree with this part, well, whatever. I think the liberals are better than whoever, so that's who they're going to vote for. Conservatives, no, they punish their own party for going out of step on one thing. Like, I'll give you an example with the last federal election. We were in the lead. The conservatives were in the lead all the way. And then vaccine mandates came. And the PPC pounced all over that, right? And they were telling people that, we had one guy that was a minister in town telling people that if you got vaccinated, it was the mark of the beast. Now, this guy has a congregation of several thousand people. So we lost, thousands of votes to the PPC that were against vaccine mandates. Right? So they split the vote. That's where I say that he's a party that's his only goal is to split the vote. He knows he's never going to win. So party lines matter because as soon as you start confusing the conversation, talking about your own stuff that deviates from the party line, you start to undermine the party. Because if the majority of people agree with the party platform and you have 3 or 4 sitting MPs that are deviating from that, then now the public can't trust it anymore. And the public can't trust that these people aren't going to, throw a wrench into the plans that you voted for. Or the word might spread, no, conservatives or liberals or whatever don't believe that because I heard one of them say this. And then, you throw everything in disarray. So you have to toe the party line. Believe me, the party knows more than you do, more than your hockey club, more than your neighbors or what you're hearing in your community. Canada's a lot bigger than your neighborhood. Canada's a lot bigger than your riding. So just because your riding may feel a certain way about a federal issue, understand that the party has to look at this federally. What's going to make us win federally? What's happening in your riding may not be that important in the face of what's happening federally. And when you're in it, because this is your election to lose, it's frustrating when what's best for the party is not best for your particular riding. That can become very problematic. But that's the reality. And when that happens, you need to be able to walk that fine line of towing that party line without completely, selling yourself out and knowing how to spin it so you can get around it and move around it and away from it and everything else without pissing anybody off. So on that note, when we're in campaign mode, HQ will send down talking points so that you can know what to say about certain issues in a way that is clear and positively reflects what the party wants you to say. Another good thing to do is to listen to the leaders of your party and ad lib what they're saying. As long as you're regurgitating what party leaders are saying or the top level officials that you know never screw up, as long as you're paraphrasing their messaging, you're never going to go wrong. And you're never going to make a mistake. And there's no worse feeling in the world than when headquarters calls you, or the war room, because we always have a war room in Ottawa, right, for a federal election or even provincial. When the war room calls you and says, why is your candidate saying XYZ? Tell them to stop it and delete that post right now. There's no worse, more embarrassing feeling ever. You never want to be that. And I've said this before, anytime you make a headline for the wrong reasons, you're causing your party $1 million a day. That's how much you're costing them. Your party would rather you stay under the radar, never get in the paper, never do a live interview, never do a debate. They would rather you take all the, losing votes from doing all of that than risking losing votes and $1 million a day with you screwing up. So, by the way, there may come a time, especially when you're new, when HQ might forbid you from doing a debate. It's not up to you. So they might call and say, you're not doing any interviews, you're not doing any debates. So now your phone's going to start ringing off the hook with reporters that want interviews, want you to make a statement on something, want you to do the debate. And when you decline politely, then they want to know why you're not debating. And they're going to say horrible things about you in the press. And you're going to take your lumps. And people are going to call you a coward. And you have to shut up. Because HQ did the math. And from the way they're polling, they feel that if you screw up in a debate, then there's no salvaging anything. Your only chance in hell is if you stay under the radar. And if that's what they decide, it doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what your campaign wants. You got to shut up and stay out of the way. And that happens quite a bit. So if you want to be the guy they pick because they know you're safe, don't ever deviate from the party line. So what I like to do, I don't like to regurgitate what they send me exactly how they send it, because a million other candidates do that, and then it's obvious that candidates are just repeating what they're being told to say. So what I like to do is I take HQ talking points and I throw a bit of emotion in it, some hot pepper and some maple syrup or whatever, and then I post it. So I ad-lib it, I personalize it, I expand on it a little bit, but I never, ever deviate from it. Ever. Ever. Never deviate from the party line. Never deviate from talking points. Like I said, personalize them, make them sound like you, expand on them a little bit, whatever, but never, ever deviate from it. It will only ever hurt you. And like I said, when you start saying, I agree with the party on every single thing, but not this, you're not standing in integrity. What you're doing is telling your voter they can't trust you to be either liberal, conservative, NDP, depending what you are. So if you really want to serve democracy, then you need to toe the party line. And when people don't understand why you do it, and they villainize you for it, you've got to take those lumps. And when HQ tells you not to do an interview or not to do a debate, and you realize that really makes you look like shit, and people are telling you they're not going to vote for you because now they think you're a coward, you can't even respond. Let me give you a quick tip with journalists, by the way, because they're shady as hell. Journalists, they want to trap you. And what they want to do is get you in a conversation and get you so comfortable that you forget you're talking to a journalist. And they will often take half of your sentence, twist it out of context, and sensationalize what you say. So this is what you do in this situation. Whenever a journalist wants an interview with you, you're never going to say no. You're always going to say yes. But what you're going to say is, unfortunately, I'm so busy. I don't, have a minute. But if you can send me your questions in writing, I'll be happy to respond. This way, you can take your time and craft a well-crafted response. During election time, if the questions are kind of stump questions, like they could stump you, you would send them to HQ and they would coach you on how to respond to something like that. So then you can respond in writing. Now, how this protects you is two things. Is A, they can't twist what you say, and if they do anyway, because sometimes they will anyway, you can actually publish the exact email with the full conversation to prove to the public that they took what you said out of context. And that will save your ass later. Take that advice with journalists. Never, ever, ever speak to a journalist one-on-one live. Not unless you're very seasoned at what you're doing, or unless you're very rehearsed on all the things they could shock you with or surprise you with, because they love to surprise you and they love to catch you stuttering. And even if you stutter a little bit and then you give the perfect answer, they'll just cut out the perfect answer and show the part of you stuttering. So really, I try to have all communications with journalists in writing. I don't trust them. These days, out of necessity, all journalists have become tabloid journalists pretty much. So just to be on the safe side, never speak to one in person if you can avoid it. Always try to do it in writing until you really learn the ropes. But going back to party lines, they matter. If the party's asking you to fall a certain way on a subject, that's because that is what the country wants. And whether you agree with it or not, whether you think, their polling is right, so your brain apparently knows better than the most sophisticated polling software on the planet that they're all using. So that's, how sophisticated your brain is, right? So understand that if you even have that feeling that you know better, you're wrong. I'm telling you now, you're wrong. You're wrong. Your perspective is skewed because you're hanging around, people that are very myopic in their thinking. They're not politicians. They're everyday people, and they don't understand the world. They don't understand the nation. They don't understand the pulse of the nation that's happening, and the undercurrent of things that are building, because they only know and hear what their friends, their family say. So when the party, any party, is telling you, hey, on this subject, this is where we're going, you need to toe the line. I had to fire a volunteer during the O'Toole election. So it was last federal. So last federal, O'Toole was going, really hard on the environment, and he wanted to reframe the perception that conservatives don't care about the climate. So that was, our platform was really, really strong on the environment at that time, and was going to tackle climate change. And it was important that we all, were on that page. And I had a volunteer that was knocking door to door that was telling people that we should like climate change because it would help Canada become a tropical country, and then we could become a tourist destination. I'm not lying. This actually happened. So that got reported back to me. That, you got a door knocker that's telling people that climate change is a good thing and we shouldn't fight it. During the O'Toole, of all campaigns, it had to be the O'Toole campaign that this guy's doing. I had to fire him. As I can't have, a door knocker going around spreading that kind of misinformation, as he's handing out pictures with O'Toole on it. I just couldn't have it, so party lines matter. And there's going to be times where people deviate from the messaging, even on your own team, against your, like in my case with a volunteer, right? And you have to nip that in the bud. Because if it ever got back to us, see, look, your memberships are saying climate change is a good thing. I could say, yeah, and we fired him. He's gone. There's no room for that in our party. The same way there's no room for, there's certain things that you just can't make room for politically. So there's certain faux pas that an apology just ain't going to cut it. Especially when you, again, refuse to shift ideology, right? Because, again, my personal integrity, I keep hearing that all the time. If you had integrity, you'd be serving democracy. If you had integrity, you'd be caring about what the nation thinks more than what you think. Like, for example, I believe in democracy so much that when we have a leadership convention, I don't even have a preference as to who wins. I mean, I might personally a little bit like one person more than the other, or think maybe it'd be exciting to see this person win instead of that one on some little level, sure, but I really don't get involved in leadership races. That's not my thing unless my client's the one, going for the spot. But, I have no personal preference who wins. I'd like my party to win, of course, sure, because I'd like to raise my rates, right? But at the end of the day, whoever wins, it doesn't matter because the loyal opposition still exists and there's still work to be done regardless of who's the one sitting in the top chair. And especially when it comes to party leadership, I know whoever the party in, quote unquote, all the membership chooses to be leader is going to be the right one. And I'm happy to give whoever that is all of my energy. So, when, for example, I really liked Scheer. I thought Andrew Scheer would have been a fantastic prime minister. I really liked him. And it didn't work out. So then, they handed us O'Toole. And I thought O'Toole was great. I thought he was fantastic for bringing conservatism into the modern age. I was really loved O'Toole. That was a fantastic federal campaign to work on, but then he was decapitated as soon as he lost that election, and then we had the new leadership race and Charest and Pierre, and I thought really Pierre was the stronger one, so I was pleased when he won. But if Charest had won, I would have worked just as hard for any candidate under a Charest leadership than I would have with Pierre. And that's because what I care about is what the collective wants. I am more interested in what the conservative collective wants than what Daniela Siggia wants for conservatives. My job is to represent whoever the leadership is and whoever the constituents pick as their candidates. My job is to work like hell to make sure they win, or at least do a damn good showing. So if you can save the partisanship stuff for the horse and pony show, but behind the scenes, you're always looking to see what good could you do for the country today. And sometimes that might mean collaborating with someone from across the floor. And sometimes that might mean advocating for a constituent that really can't stand you. And sometimes that might mean shutting up when you really want to scream from the rooftops how much you hate a policy that your own party is putting forward, and you've got to sit there and shut up. That is hard. That is hard to do, but that's how you serve democracy. So it's not about compromising your principles. It's about understanding you've promised your loyalty to your voters, not to your party. Fuck the party. To your voters. You've promised your voters that are conservative leaning, that you're liberal leaning or NDP leaning, that is who you're serving, and therefore that's the spirit that you're going to represent, is from that platform, not from you versus the platform. You're going to represent the platform whether you like it or not. And that's how you serve democracy. That's how you serve your constituents. You're not breaking your integrity. You're actually restoring your integrity. You're protecting your integrity by keeping your promise to your voters, by being loyal to the party you said that you would represent on their behalf. That's a very important distinction to make internally, because externally, the public will never understand that. So you need to understand it deep in your soul, so that when the press is hounding you or the public is hounding you and you're under huge public pressure, you won't crack. Because you know that remaining stoic in that moment, that's how you're serving democracy, and that's what matters most.